Hey, what's up guys, it's Bakes here and thank you for joining me for this episode of my random horror reviews. Today's movie is a new film only from last year, and it was one that was actually quite popular from 2023. I've reviewed so many modern films lately, I gotta just switch it up and actually pick something from at least a couple decades ago, but either way, today's movie is 2023's Evil Dead Rise. Before I get into my thoughts of this movie, I'm just going to quickly go through the plot for this one. So in this movie, we follow a family of four, a single mum, her three kids, plus an aunt, who is also the sister to our mum in this movie, who are living in this apartment complex when an earthquake happens. The son, who just happens to be in the parking garage at the time, finds a hole in the ground, goes down there and finds a copy of the Necronomicon. But it's not just the book this time, it's also like a vinyl recording. And of course he starts fucking around with it and then unleashes some evil. The evil ends up possessing the mum, and then the rest of the movie is the family trying to survive the mum who is attacking them and, as I said, now possessed. So this is a movie that could have easily been a disaster in my eyes, just based off the setup and the film surrounding so many child characters. And what I mean by that is there's no problem with having child leads, but sometimes studios get a little bit scared to make their movie ballsy because they're too scared of putting the kids in serious danger or killing them off or anything. So, that could have been a big problem. I feel like a lot of people did presume that this movie was going to fail. I also acknowledge that that was a possibility in my eyes as well. But from the early stuff that we knew about this movie, knowing that it was going to be set in an apartment complex, kids taking on their possessed mum, the best thing in my eyes is that this movie could have at least been fun. It might have not been the best story or, have some really weak elements, but at least all I was hoping for in this movie was that it was fun. So, without delaying any longer, let's get into my deeper thoughts of Evil Dead Rise from 2023. So if you guys have been on my channel before or seen any of my reviews, you guys would know that I'm not the biggest fan of these paranormal possession movies. They just all seem to be really repetitive, especially from maybe the 2010s onwards. Every year there seems to be the exact same movie as what came before. They're not really changing it up. I'm just not the biggest fan of these paranormal possession movies, but the Evil Dead franchise has always been an exception because they really do play it differently, and it just seems to be something a little bit more digestible, at least for myself. These movies have up violence, more blood, more gore, more foul nature, lots of swearing and gritty and grimier, and the movies just sort of feel dirty, but that's kind of up my alley. It's just not your typical someone possessed and strapped to a bed while a priest comes in and says a prayer and things fly around the room. As I said, something that just seems to be repeated in these paranormal movies, and you get them every year and it's the exact same as the last. As I said, the Evil Dead franchise plays it different, a more gory edge, a more foul-natured edge. In this movie we had a human amalgamation, absorption, hybrid thing, which, was appreciated, and as I said, you don't normally see in a possession movie. So, this is a weird one because it's kind of hard and easy at the same time to compare this movie to the original trilogy of Evil Dead films, and I'm including Army of Darkness in that original trilogy. Because like the original three films, it's fun, but, it has a more modern edge to it. It's less slapstick, it feels a bit more gross and grimy, but as I said, the main thing that you can clump it into with the original three films, and maybe even the 2013 remake, is that it's fun, and that, you can have a lot of fun with the gore and the blood and the scares and the thrills. So, it is an interesting film to talk about. So getting into specifics now, and I guess I'll start with the gore and the violence in this movie because, as I said before, it's great and it's a lot of fun. I feel like they really deliver a variety of violence in this film as well. And I've recently had a few people, sort of say, and I guess it's sort of people that this isn't really their type of horror movie, it's all different for different people, but they say, how can you have fun with violence and gore, but this movie, you have someone choking on an eyeball, they got slingshotted into their mouth, you got a cheese grater on a leg, like I said before, you got this humanoid amalgamation, absorption monster thing. How can you not have fun with, moments like that? Yes, the choking on the eyeball is a bit more goofy, but the cheese grater on the leg, it makes you squirm, it's gross, but I like that, I think it's fun. It's become kind of standard that an Evil Dead movie will literally provide a bloodbath, a character by the end of the movie is literally red from head to toe, covered in blood, which I think is fun. There were a few moments where I feel like they could have upped the ante a little bit, pushed the envelope a little bit more. Maybe that's me just being greedy, I don't know. I also thought this movie had pretty good performances. I'd say more so enjoyable characters, in my opinion. I really like how the family was portrayed in this movie, like rough around the edges, rock and roll, modernized family, if that makes sense. Like, you got the mum who you sort of presume is a tattoo artist because that's what she's practicing. She's got the dyed red hair, tattoo sleeves up her arms. You got the son with the earrings and he wants to be a DJ. Activist older daughter, and then the younger daughter is like ripping heads off dolls and putting them on spikes and stuff. My favourite performance in this movie probably is the mum who ends up getting possessed. I don't know, I just really liked her character, non-possessed and possessed. But, getting back to the family, I feel like, first of all, you don't usually follow a family like that in a movie. Normally they try to make them just your more typical, everyone gets along sort of family with maybe like a couple of, spanners in the works or whatever. But you don't normally see a family like this in a mainstream movie. But whenever you do, they sort of portrayed as like gross and grimy and problematic and whatever. But in this movie, they're just a normal family with just, some personality quirks, which, as I said, I liked the characters that we got in this movie. Getting back into a point I briefly brought up before, but again, I really do appreciate that this movie had balls, especially with the kids. Because again, that could have been a huge issue in my eyes. It could have stopped me from enjoying the movie as much as I did. With a film that's majority kids/teens in lead roles, sometimes the studios get a little bit worried about putting them through violence or just killing them off in general, which, as I said before, I was a little bit worried about going into this movie. I could have seen this film being, a low kill count movie. The kid's rarely in any huge danger, sort of staying one step ahead of the mum, and that's sort of their loophole about, staying out of danger. But again, I really do like the kids that in this movie, they were sort of on an even playing field about being potentially picked off, and whoever wrote this movie sort of said, you know what, fuck them. Like, I do like that, I appreciate it. And I feel like more horror movies need to do that. I do understand it's not necessary for every horror movie to have kids being picked off and killed. It's just not designed for every horror film. But, a lot of horror films starring kids, you can just feel like they're not in any real danger. You kind of get from the build-up and the setup of the movie that they're going to be safe for the film's runtime. And I know that sounds fucked up of me, saying like, oh, we need to kill more kids in movies, let me clarify. But as I said, the movie having balls and putting the kids in danger and, killing off some, it wins points for me. And this movie, they do a very particular way of putting the kids in danger. It's not so black and white as just killing them off. And maybe that's a little loophole that, could work for more possession paranormal movies that star teens and kids in lead roles. I don't know, but again, I just really appreciated that the kids were actually in danger in this movie. I remember when this movie came out, hearing a lot of people talk about and hype up the opening and closing sequences to this movie. Just hearing a lot of people say, oh, the title sequence is one of the coolest title sequences in a long time, and then by the end of the movie it comes full circle. And I remember watching this movie for the first time in cinemas last year, sitting down being real hyped for the first 10 minutes. And to be fair, the opening and closing sequences in this movie are really cool. However, story-wise, they do feel a little bit shoehorned in. For those who don't know, the opening and closing sequences to this movie kind of have nothing to do with the main story going on in this film. Yes, there is like a little tie-in, they're not completely unrelated, but if the opening and closing sequences were taken out of this movie, you would probably still get the exact same thing out of it. It doesn't affect the main storyline going on. So not saying that I don't like the opening and closing sequences or that it was a wrong choice to put them in there. But the movie taking place in this apartment complex, which again I think is a really cool idea and works, I feel like it could have been a really cool chance to add story without adding to the runtime, replacing the opening and closing sequences with, a bit more detail of how the Necronomicon got in this building and stuff like that, take away what we got in the actual opening and closing sequences and replacing it with something like that could have added to the story a little bit more, because I actually think the runtime is perfect in this movie. So adding on a bit more backstory to the apartment building and how the Necronomicon got there, and leaving in the opening and closing sequences could have just, thrown the movie's runtime, a little bit too much through a loop and a little bit too long. So replacing it may have been a better option. But yes, as I said, the opening and closing sequences are really cool, but maybe, in my eyes, a little bit unnecessary. I don't know, it's each to their own, I guess. So to sum up my final thoughts of this movie, like I said in my introduction, when I first saw this movie in cinemas last year, I had my fingers crossed. At least this movie could be fun. If it's a bad story or, there's weaker elements, the one thing I hope is that this movie is at least fun. And the movie is fun, and more on top of that, could have been a disaster for the reasons that I listed, much earlier in the review, but it made the most of its location, and it had balls, which I appreciated. It had fun gore. The actress that plays the mum is great, super creepy, gave lots of charisma to a role that is basically playing a possessed corpse. I really like the line in the movie, Mummy is with the maggots now. Like, I feel like it's so dirty and grimy, and just imagine that, like a fucking demon possessing the corpse of a loved one, and they just say, nah, your mum's with the maggots. Like, that's fucking gnarly, but I do feel like people drained the fuck out of that line. Like, I remember walking out of the cinema and people next to me, like, 10 times, just in, like, a span of a minute, Mummy's with the maggots now, and I saw it all over fucking social media and everything after people watched this movie. They drained the fuck out of that line, but I love it. Speaking of which, like, before I get off that topic of people draining this movie, this is gonna sound weird because, as I said, I really do like this movie, but it's got to be one of the most overrated horror movies of 2023. And again, don't get that twisted, because being overrated is not the same as being bad. I don't think this movie is a bad film at all. I just do think it's overrated. A lot of people were sucking off this movie. But to sum it up with a final rating, I'm going to give Evil Dead Rise a 7.5. It is roughly the same rating as what I gave it when I saw it for the first time in cinemas. This was the second time watch just for this review. But again, held up with the fun. It delivered more than what I was at least hoping it would. So Evil Dead Rise, really rewatchable as well. This is one that, you wouldn't sweat chucking on again. It's a breeze to get through, good runtime. So I'll leave my thoughts there for that movie. If you've got any thoughts that you want to share for Evil Dead Rise, put them in the comments below. And thank you for joining me for another random horror review, guys, and I'll see you for another video soon. Peace.